Besides being one of the best-known American tank destroyers of the Second World War and seeing widespread use among Allied nations through the Lend-Lease program, the M10 Wolverine Tank Destroyer has another strange claim to fame. It was one of the very few tanks to ever engage a naval vessel and win. The event in question is a little-known engagement that took place on the night of December 11th through the 12th, 1944, at Ormoc Bay on the Isle of Leyte during the Philippines campaign. That night, U.S. infantry from the famous 77th Infantry Division, with armored support, successfully defended their beachhead against an attempted amphibious landing by Imperial Japanese Navy forces, ultimately resulting in M10s sinking a Japanese No.101-class landing ship. According to the official history of the U.S. Army 77th, this was the only time in the history of the Pacific War and Second World War in general that an infantry unit with armored support was credited with successfully sinking an enemy naval vessel from dry land. Hello dear viewer, Tank Encyclopedia is currently closing in on 100,000 subscribers. With this important milestone in sight, we'd like to remind you to subscribe if you enjoy our content and want to see more. Now, back to the video. Just one day after the attack on Pearl Harbor, on December 8, 1941, Imperial Japanese forces launched an invasion of the Philippines, which at that time was an unincorporated territory of the United States. Despite fierce resistance, by May 1942, the islands had fallen. U.S. forces under General Douglas MacArthur were driven out, and the Philippines became a key outpost of Japan's rapidly expanding Pacific Empire. But by 1944, the tide of war had turned. American and Allied forces had pushed the Japanese back across the Pacific, island by island. Now, MacArthur was determined to fulfill his famous promise, "I shall return." On October 20th, 1944, the U.S. 6th Army, with powerful naval and air support, landed on the eastern coast of Leyte, a large island in the southeastern Philippines. The main landings occurred near Dulag, Tanwan, and Palo, where American forces quickly established a beachhead. Defending the Philippines was General Tomoyuki Yamashita, a skilled and fearsome commander dubbed the Tiger of Malaya, due to his rapid conquest of Malaya and Singapore in 1942. But Yamashita and the Japanese High Command drastically underestimated the strength and scale of the American invasion. In a desperate attempt to repel the landings, the Imperial Japanese Navy engaged in what would become the Battle of Leyte Gulf, October 23rd to the 26th, the largest naval battle of World War II, and by some metrics in history. The result was a catastrophic defeat for the Japanese, from which their navy never recovered. Unaware of the full scale of that defeat, Yamashita continued reinforcing Leyte. He poured in 34,000 troops from multiple Imperial Japanese Army divisions, the 1st, the 8th, the 26th, the 30th, and the 102nd, primarily landing them on the island's western coast via the small port at Ormoc Bay. For several weeks, these reinforcements arrived relatively unhindered, bolstering Japanese resistance and threatening the American advance. Realizing that the flow of enemy troops through Ormoc had to be stopped, U.S. commanders launched a series of operations from November 9th to December 21st. Combining land, sea, and air assaults to interdict and destroy Japanese reinforcements along Leyte's western coast. Among these actions was a direct amphibious landing at Ormoc, aimed at seizing the port and cutting off the Japanese reinforcement corridor. The unit chosen for this critical task was the 77th Infantry Division, nicknamed the Old Bastards. Just weeks earlier, this battle-hardened division had distinguished itself during the Battle of Guam and the Mariana Islands campaign, earning a reputation as one of the toughest and most capable formations in the Pacific. Now they would have to prove themselves once more. Prior to America's involvement in the Second World War, their government had realized that they would need to drastically rebuild their military if they wanted to weather the upcoming storm. At this time, the US officially had no stake in the conflict, with the vast majority of people seeing it as Europe's problem. To rebuild, several drafts were initiated. Then, on December 7, 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor happened. In response, the US declared war on the Empire of Japan. Then, 3 days later, Adolf Hitler declared war on the United States. Almost immediately, in the wake of these events, millions of Americans volunteered to serve. The drafts also intensified. Due to this influx of manpower, the US military was standing up new units left, right, and center. One of these was the 77th Sustainment Brigade, which was stood up in 1942 and would go on to inherit the title of 77th Infantry, which had previously served with distinction during World War I. The 77th became something of an experiment. The military was concerned that eventually it would run out of young men to fill the ranks. Most troops in the forces at that time ranged between the late teens and early 20s, but what would happen if all that were left were 30, 40, or 50-year-olds? Asked Germany. As such, the 77th was made of men entirely of that age bracket. They went on to become one of the most successful U.S. Army infantry divisions in the PTO, and they frequently outperformed units made up of more youthful men. The 77th Infantry Division's first combat experience came during the Mariana Islands campaign, where they supported U.S. Marine Corps forces under General Holland "Howlin' Mad" Smith. Smith had little faith in Army units after a poor showing by the 27th, whose commander he personally relieved and replaced with a Marine officer. So when the experimental 77th arrived, Smith was skeptical. Rather than deploying them as a single unit, he broke them up to support Marine units piecemeal during the Guam landings on July 21, 1944. But within days, reports on the 77th performance were overwhelmingly positive. Impressed, Smith reassembled them into a single force and assigned them to a major amphibious assault to bolster the right flank. The average age in the 77th was 35, and as wave after wave of these middle-aged troops stormed the beaches, one young Marine famously quipped, "Would you look at those old bastards go?" The nickname, the Old Bastards, stuck for the rest of the war. The Battle of Guam ended on August 10, 1944, with the 77th firmly establishing its reputation. They recorded 2,741 enemy kills for 248 losses, an 11-to-1 kill ratio. In recognition of their success, the division was granted leave on New Caledonia, but fate had other plans. En route to New Caledonia, the 77th Infantry was diverted to Leyte to support General MacArthur's stalled campaign. They arrived on Thanksgiving Day, November 23, 1944, and came ashore in Tarragona 2 days later, just south of the 6th Army's original landings. Japanese forces were using Ormoc Bay on Leyte's western coast as a reinforcement hub. Ormoc's deepwater pier made it ideal for resupply, so a bold plan was devised. The 77th would land south of Ormoc and cut off Japanese logistics. The landing was scheduled for December 7th, with the 77th going ashore between the Bode and Baganbon rivers, near Ipoh. Heavily outnumbered and low on supplies, the division adopted a strategy of seizing and repurposing Japanese materiel while destroying everything they couldn't capture and reuse. Backed by field artillery and airborne troops, the 77th landed under cover of destroyer bombardment and air support at 7 a.m. Resistance was light, and within 35 minutes the beachhead was secure. The 305th and 307th Regiments of the 77th quickly achieved all their objectives, and the unexpectedly easy landing prompted an immediate push towards Ipoh. Crucially for our story, the 77th also had a small number of M10 tank destroyers deployed within its regiments. Entering service in 1942, the officially designated 3-inch gun motor carriage M10, better known as the Wolverine, was a mainstay vehicle for American tank destroyer battalions throughout World War II. While it was more commonly deployed in the European theater, they were present in tank destroyer battalions during the Pacific campaigns too. Their first deployment in the Pacific, however, was during the Kwajalein campaign in spring 1944 as a substitute for tanks in support of the 7th Infantry Division. It wasn't until campaigns like New Guinea and the Palau Islands later in 1944 that they were used as part of a tank destroyer battalion. The largest deployment of the M10 was during the Philippines campaign, through which M10s of the 632nd, 637th, and 640th Tank Destroyer Battalions would all see extensive deployment and action. The M10 was based on the versatile M4 Sherman chassis and had a unique profile thanks to its angled slabs of armor plate that were only 2¼ inches thick, about 57 millimeters at most. Armament consisted of the powerful 3-inch gun M7 and a secondary pintle-mounted 50 caliber or 12.7mm Browning M2 machine gun. The 76mm M7 gun could penetrate up to 135mm of armor plate, sloped at 30 degrees depending on the shell type. Much like the M4A2 model of Sherman, the Wolverine was propelled by General Motors' 6046 twin diesel, producing 375 horsepower and propelling the 32-ton vehicle to a top speed of 25 to 30 miles an hour. Drive was transferred to the tracks via a forward sprocket wheel, and the vehicle sat on the vertical volute spring suspension system, which consisted of 3 two-wheel bogies per side. A 5-man crew operated the M10, consisting of the commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver. The M10 was not the most popular vehicle among armored units in the Pacific, mostly because they were open-topped. Not only did this leave the crew exposed to harsh tropical conditions, but it also left them exposed to the crazed infantry-based anti-tank tactics of the desperate Japanese defender. Weapons of choice included grenades, firebombs, mines, all of which could just be tossed into the open fighting compartment. Japanese tanks were few and far between, and were little match for the 3-inch gun anyway. As such, M10s were more commonly used as mobile artillery for direct and indirect infantry fire support, largely slinging high explosive shells rather than armor-piercing. This was pretty much the role the M10s took on Leyte during the Ormoc operation. As the 77th advanced, the M10s blasted away enemy strongpoints, brought down enemy-held buildings, and erased machine gun positions. By December 11, 1944, and after determined resistance by the outnumbered Japanese army divisions, the 77th and attached elements had successfully captured Ormoc and had began spreading out towards other objectives like Kogon, Valencia, and Tagbong River. As a result of the battle, the settlement of Ormoc had been all but flattened. It was expected that little more than mopping up operations would follow up over the next few days. The Imperial Japanese Navy had other plans. Little did the old bastards know that one hell of a fight awaited the 307th Infantry Regiment, who were holding defensive positions along Ormoc shore. The best description of the unusual engagement that took place comes from the pages of the book Ours to Hold It High, published in 1947, an official history of the 77th Infantry Division and their Pacific exploits, written by the, quote, men who were there. During the night of December 11th, organizations defending the waterfront and beaches, the 7th AAA Battalion, elements of the Amphibious Tractor Battalion, and the Tank Destroyer and Cannon Company weapons of the 307th Infantry, observed several enemy vessels moving into the bay, apparently with the intention of landing at Ormoc and on the beaches northwest of the town. The first vessel to be seen was a 50-man barge approaching the Ormoc pier. By the time it came within range, all units had been alerted and the guns which bristled along the shoreline were tracking the unsuspecting craft. Fire was withheld until it was 50 yards from the pier. Then, the silent night was shattered by the point-blank roar of 40mm guns, 50 caliber machine guns, self-propelled howitzers and guns, and light and heavy machine guns, tracers from all of which converged onto the barge. The first round of 40mm was a direct hit, and the barge became an orange ball of flame. Some Japanese stood on the gunwales and screamed, "Don't shoot!" apparently in the belief that their forces still occupied the town. They were smothered by fire from all sides, which literally blew the barge out of the water. The light from the burning boat, augmented by 60mm illuminating shells, disclosed another Japanese landing vessel of the approximate size and shape of an LST, which, under cover of darkness, had beached northwest of Ormoc and was unloading troops and heavy equipment. Self-propelled howitzers and guns of the 307th Infantry, which were emplaced along the beach within 1,000 yards of the ship, opened fire while artillery forward observers of the 902nd Field Artillery Battalion, who were with the 307th, directed artillery fire on the landing point and inland. Excitement ran high as a terrific volume of fire was poured into the enemy ship. A gunner on an M10 Tank Destroyer was heard shouting above the din, "Throw up another flare so I can hit the son of a bitch again." The Japanese skipper attempted to retract his ship, but had not withdrawn over 50 yards when it burst into flames and sank. There were indicators that another vessel had beached still farther to the west. The artillery shelled the area, and at dawn, a crippled ship was observed slowly making its escape far across the bay to the east. The shelling continued, and before it got out of range, its speed had been further reduced, its hull pierced, and clouds of black smoke were pouring from it. Planes later located and sank this vessel. It would appear that the landing ships sunk by the M10s and their compatriots were No. 101-class landing ships, as they were the closest Japanese equivalent to American LSTs, or landing ship tanks. The No. 101 landing ship could carry anything from 200 tons of freight, approximately 320 troops, 13 Type 95 Hago light tanks, 9 Type 97 Chiha medium tanks, 7 Type 2 Kami amphibious tanks, or combinations thereof. Of the planned 103 No. 101-class landing ships, just 69 of these vessels were completed during the war. The Imperial Japanese Navy received 41, 18 of which were lost during the Battle of Leyte. 2 of these were effectively put out of action by the shore-based M10s and their entourage, one being destroyed outright, the other being crippled enough to make it an easy target for aircraft. The rapid, unscheduled disassembly of both vessels severely hindered Japanese attempt at reinforcing Leyte. At least one of these ships had been identified as number 159, and its loss was entered into official records. Identified in the 77th records as barges, much smaller Daihatsu-class landing crafts were also used in the attempted landing. These smaller craft had been a staple of Japanese amphibious landings since 1937. A tiny craft compared to the number 101, the vessels could carry anything from 70 men, 1 hago, or 9 tons of cargo. As described, these stood no chance against the barrage of incoming fire from the shore of Ormoc. Many Japanese personnel were captured after managing to escape the bombardment. After gathering information from the prisoners, it became clear that the Japanese had thought their forces still occupied Ormoc and were not expecting to be fired upon, catching the Japanese landing forces with their fundoshi down. The 2 number 101s that reached the shoreline managed to unload a combination of approximately 150 men, 8 amphibious tanks, and a large quantity of ammunition. In the post-battle report, the amphibious tanks were identified as the latest model, likely referring to the Type 2 Kami. These light amphibious tanks shared many components with the Type 95 Ha-Go and came equipped with detachable pontoons that allowed them to float. Following the Battle of Ormoc Bay, the Japanese were severely weakened. The 77th Infantry Division would embark on what a War Department observer would describe as a divisional epic. Over the next few weeks, they would surge across the island of Leyte, capturing crucial settlements, supply routes, and strategic positions, all while making use of, quote, supplies taken in excess of authorized listings. Not only was the 77th soundly defeating Japanese forces, they were also adding insult to injury by stealing their vehicles, weapons, and food. MacArthur's Battle of Leyte ended in late December 1944 with an American victory, although fighting on the island would continue until the end of the war. During their time on the island, the Old Bastards were credited with approximately 19,450 confirmed kills, against a loss of 543 men. That's a 36-to-1 ratio. After helping secure Leyte, the 77th launched a preemptive strike on the Karamareto Islands, uncovering a massive kamikaze boat fleet and safeguarding the Okinawa invasion, before playing a key role in battles at Leshima, Hacksaw Ridge, and the Shuri Line, ultimately returning to the Philippines to prepare for an invasion of Japan that never came. The events of the Battle of Ormoc Bay remain the only recorded time an armored vehicle has effectively scored a kill on a naval vessel. Of course, other similar events may have gone unrecorded. After Leyte, the M10 continued to see combat across the Philippines campaign. Indeed, this was the largest deployment of the vehicle, with tank destroyer battalions such as the 632nd, 637th, and 640th all making great use of their vehicles during the retaking of the Philippines. However, in later campaigns, the vehicle was used less. Tank destroyers continued to see action in the Pacific, with the newer M18 Hellcat eventually replacing the older M10 in many units. The 77th Infantry Division's 306th Infantry Regiment would be one of the outfits equipped with the M18 for Okinawa, replacing lost M10s. And that concludes our video on this unusual showdown in the East. Do you know of any other instances where tanks managed to sink an enemy naval vessel? If so, let us know in the comments below. As always, we invite you to subscribe to stay updated on future content. If you'd like to contribute further, consider Patreon or PayPal. We want to especially thank our medium and heavy tank Patreon supporters: Barrett Guntower, Dan Fitzpatrick, Dave Shuford, Leslie Hulkower, Michael Herman, Nick H, Owen M, R. Rob, Sopwith21, and Wolfhund. Your generous contributions help fund our research, illustrations, and video production. Until next time, keep us in your sights.